It's great to be with you guys this morning. I guess we're going to talk about dinosaurs now for a little bit, and I think I've already told you a little bit about the ministry, so I'll skip over that. But how many of you heard about this big traffic jam caused by a sauropod dinosaur? Okay, this is not real life.
What movie is that?
Well, that's actually my next question. Does anybody know what movie this is from? It's one of the Jurassic, there's Jurassic Parks and Jurassic World. How many have seen any of those Jurassic type movies?
Yeah.
What? You've seen those evolutionary movies? Well, I had to watch them all. But of course I did it for research purposes, so I could, bring this talk to you today, right? But I actually co-authored a movie review on the latest one. It's called Jurassic World Rebirth. And my part was contributing worldview observations, which reveal the worldview of the movie producers. Everybody has a worldview. And there's two predominant worldviews out there. There's a biblical worldview and there's a secular worldview. And just to compare the two, the biblical worldview, of course, is based on God's Word, whereas the secular worldview is based on man's Word. The biblical worldview, of course, is believed by Christians, whereas the secular worldview is believed by atheists. In the biblical worldview, there's a supernatural creation, but in the secular worldview, only natural processes are permitted. In the biblical worldview, death came from one man's sin, right? But in the secular worldview, man came from death and survival of the fittest. And in the biblical worldview, the flood formed the fossils, but in a secular worldview, the fossils sort of inform how evolution happened. And evolution, of course, is this belief that all living things came from a single-celled organism by natural processes. So you can see that the biblical and secular worldview contradict in every way. But Romans 12:2 tells us not to be conformed to this world, but be transformed by the renewing of your mind. So being conformed to this world, that's having a secular worldview. But renewing your mind, that's having a biblical worldview, right? So today we're going to learn all about dinosaurs, but we're going to look at it, the same evidence that secular scientists look at, but we're going to look at it through a biblical worldview lens. Wouldn't it be great if we could just hold up a lens and see everything the way God sees it? Well, actually we can. It's called the Bible, right? So let's talk about dinosaurs from a biblical worldview point of view. Okay, All right, so the first question I'm going to ask you is, does the Bible even talk about dinosaurs? Is the word dinosaur in the Bible? Well, no, the word itself is not in the Bible. But what's that scripture about kangaroos? Do you remember that one, Pastor Rod?
Kangaroos?
Yeah, no. Well, not every animal has a scripture in the Bible, right? Doesn't mean they didn't exist. I mean, kangaroos existed in Bible times. They still exist today. But there's another reason why you don't find the word dinosaur in the Bible. See, it was invented by a guy named Sir Richard Owen. And it's from the Greek words dinos and sora, means terrible lizard. That's what a dinosaur is. But he coined this word in 1841. But think about when the Bible was translated to English. Like the first translations were back in the Wycliffe Bible, 1382. Or the Geneva Bible, 1560. Even your King James Bible, 1611. So these were all translated to English before the word dinosaur was invented, which was in 1841 when they started doing paleontology and digging up dinosaurs, right? Okay, so what did all these people call dinosaurs before that? They called them, both large marine reptiles and land reptiles, they called them dragons. So this is a book published in 1834. So this is a scientific book that classified large sea creatures. And it was published just 7 years before the word dinosaur was invented. But it includes creatures that we know lived in the past, like a plesiosaur. And it's called Book of the Great Sea Dragons. So before the word dinosaurs was made up, they called them marine reptiles, and land reptiles, they called them dragons. Now you might be thinking, what? Isn't, fire-breathing dragons, that's the stuff in fairy tales, right? Well, check out this reconstruction of a real dinosaur. Isn't that wild? Was this actually a fire-breathing dinosaur or dragon? This guy, his name is Dracorex hogwartsia. How's that for a mouthful? He was discovered in South Dakota in May 2003, and this is a display from a children's museum. And it says here that it's a new type of dinosaur that looks like a dragon. And actually, if you read old encyclopedias, that's what we used before there was Google. And actually, Google's what people used before there was AI. But anyway, in these old encyclopedias, it says the dragons of legends are strangely like actual creatures that have lived in the past. They are much like the great reptiles or dinosaurs which inhabited the earth long before man is supposed to have appeared on earth. So according to encyclopedias, the dragons of legends, they actually looked like real dinosaurs. You know, in simplified Chinese script, this is how you say dragon. This is how you say dinosaur. So instead of terrible lizard from the Greek, it literally means fearful dragon. That's the word dinosaur, is a fearful dragon. So the Bible's too old to have the word dinosaur in it, but I wonder what would happen if you were to search your King James Bible for the word dragons. There's actually several references to dragons. Here's one. It says, in the day that the Lord with his sore and great and strong sword shall punish Leviathan, the piercing serpent, even Leviathan, that crooked serpent, and he shall slay the dragon that is in the sea. This is in Isaiah. And in Job, it talks about him some more. Can you draw out Leviathan with a fish hook? Press down his tongue with a cord? Lay your hands on him. Remember the battle. You will not do it again. Out of his mouth go flames of torches. Sparks of fire leap forth. Wow. Torches? Sparks of fire? Did you know there were fire-breathing dragons in the Bible? Wow. It makes you think of fairy tales, but look at this. Can you actually make fire? Here's a little beetle. It's called a bombardier beetle. It can mix chemicals in its tail to make a fiery explosion to shoot at its enemies. Makes you wonder if Leviathan had the ability to mix fire-breathing chemicals. Take a look at this video.
In Job 4, in response to Job's questioning of God's wisdom, God sets out his credentials and challenges Job to answer the 77-question creation science exam. He says to Job, brace yourself like a man. I will question you, and you shall answer me. The exam covers the breadth of God's creative power, mentioning the wonders of many animals that we are familiar with, such as the lion, raven, deer, ox, and ostrich. Finally, there is Leviathan, a terrifying aquatic creature with an impenetrable hide impervious to harpoons, fearsome teeth, and a back covered in rows of shields. It even has firebrands streaming from its mouth and smoke from its nostrils. Though this may sound mythological to us, Job recognized it as a real creature. Indeed, one candidate from the fossil record is Sarcosuchus, a 12-meter or 40-foot monster with an unusual bulbous cavity at the end of the snout that could conceivably have been used for mixing fire-generating chemicals.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
So this Sarcosuchus, he's an extinct giant crocodile, and he actually fits the description of Leviathan very well. Here's how National Geographic depicted Sarcosuchus in their article. And in there they said it weighed 17,500 pounds, was 40 feet long, and probably ate dinosaurs for dinner. Wow. I mean, 40 feet long, that's the length of a school bus, to put this in context. Wow. Is God talking here about these giant marine reptiles? Well, let's go back to Job here. You know, if I bring you up to speed of what's happening in Job, there's like 30 chapters of Job's wise friends telling him how the world works, and here's what you've done wrong, and here's what you need to do, and here's how everything works. And then finally, God comes back in Job 38 and says, wait a second, where were you when I laid the foundations of the earth? Tell me if you have understanding. Who determined its measurements? Surely you know, or who stretched the line upon it? See what God's challenging him? He's talking about all these amazing things in creation, the stars and the seas and clouds and snow and hail and wind and thunder. And then he goes on, actually before even talking about Leviathan, he talks about this another big beast named Behemoth. Behold, Behemoth, which I made as I made you. He eats grass like an ox. Behold, his strength is in his loins. His power is in the muscles of his belly. He makes his tail stiff like a cedar. The sinews of his thighs are knit together. His bones are tubes of bronze, and limbs are like bars of iron. He is first of the works of God. Let him who made him bring near his sword. Wow, I mean, this thing sounds impressive. What kind of creature do you think would be the first of the works of God? What kind of creature do you think would have bones like tubes of bronze, or limbs like bars of iron? Maybe something like this cast of a sauropod dinosaur? That looked like tubes of iron? Right? Isn't that interesting? And this is not even the biggest dinosaur, by the way. And then the scripture says there, he makes his tail stiff like a cedar. What does it mean, stiff like a cedar? Well, the cedars of Lebanon are referred to 72 times in the Bible. And these are massive trees. I've got some people here for reference. You can see there's some people there. So what kind of animal would have a tail that looks like these big trees? And a lot of the Bibles, if you look at it, they'll have a little reference. Perhaps an elephant or a hippopotamus. Think about that for a second, okay? Like if you think of an elephant's tail, this does not give you the idea of a big cedar tree, right? I don't think so. What about a hippopotamus? Well, let's cover that up, actually. No, I don't think that gives you the idea of the trees of the cedars of Lebanon. No, but what about something like a big sauropod dinosaur? See, that's starting to look more like the trees of the cedars of Lebanon, right? That seems to fit the bill. So it sure sounds like the Bible does indeed talk about dinosaurs. So we're going to address a number of common questions people have about dinosaurs, such as, when did dinosaurs die out? What causes dinosaur extinction? When did the first dinosaurs live? Were dinosaurs on the ark? What did dinosaurs eat? And why are dinosaurs important? And of course, we're going to answer these from a biblical worldview by taking a look at 4 different kinds of dinosaurs a little closer. Okay, so let's talk first about this guy. Who knows what this guy is? What's his name? Anybody know? Stegosaurus. You got it. Okay, so let's ask a question here. When did Stegosaurus die out? And I'll tell you what, we'll do this as a multiple choice question. A, there was never a real Stegosaurus. B, during the late Jurassic period. C, hundreds of thousands of years ago. D, tens of thousands of years ago. E, in the last few hundred years. Or F, they haven't died out yet. Okay, let's start with the first one. There never was a real Stegosaurus dinosaur. A lot of people used to believe this kind of thing, that the dinosaurs were actually alive from the devil, put into the ground to deceive people into thinking evolution was real. We don't believe that these days because we dig up lots of dinosaur bones, so we know that they really existed. So this belief is not as common these days, I would say. But what about during the late Jurassic period? Well, that is the secular worldview, right? The late Jurassic period was about 150 million years ago, supposedly. And they believe that Stegosaurus died out then, and that all dinosaurs died out by the end of the Cretaceous period, which was 66 million years ago. Supposedly millions of years before mankind ever evolved. Well, today I'm going to show you that there's good evidence that dinosaurs lived much more recently than that. What about hundreds of thousands of years ago? Well, for that I'm going to talk to you a little bit about something called carbon dating. You may have heard of it before. It's for dating things that were once alive. And I'm going to tell you some facts about carbon dating. By facts, I mean even secular scientists would agree with this stuff. For example, it only applies to things that were once living, not rocks. Living things, basically what happens is they absorb carbon from our atmosphere. It comes from the sun, and then we breathe it in and eat plants and things like that. We get carbon in us, and there's one type of carbon, C14, and it starts decaying in your body as soon as you die. So we can accurately measure the carbon-14 in a specimen we find, like a bone or something like that. And then that gives us an idea of when it may have died if we compare the carbon in the specimen to the carbon in the atmosphere. So we can get a little bit of an idea. But here's the thing, is that all detectable carbon-14 will decay out of anything in less than 100,000 years. And again, secular scientists would agree with that. And they would also, I guess, agree with if dinosaurs died out millions of years ago, they shouldn't have any carbon-14 in them. But they do. So we now have many examples of carbon-14 found in these so-called ancient samples. These ones have the secular ages along the bottom there that range from 10 to 290 million years, supposedly. But they all have samples of carbon and carbon ages less than 50,000 years on the left side there. And 70 of these things are actually dinosaur bones. So we found several of them at this point. So, you know, since we have carbon-14 dinosaur bones, they could not have died out more than 100,000 years ago. Okay, what about tens of thousands of years ago? Well, interestingly enough, carbon-14 isn't the only thing we find in dinosaur bones. Other things have been found that don't last nearly as long as carbon. So if you haven't heard about this before, this may be a little bit shocking to you, but could even maybe change your worldview a little bit. Take a look at this video.
In the early 90s, researchers from Montana State University made a startling discovery. Inspecting a piece of T-Rex bone under a microscope, they could hardly believe their eyes. They could see dinosaur red blood cells. This discovery prompted lead scientist Dr. Mary Schweitzer to say it was exactly like looking at a slice of modern bone. But of course I couldn't believe it. I said to the lab technician, the bones after all are 65 million years old. How could blood cells survive that long? In a Discover magazine article, Dr. Schweitzer explained further her surprise. If you take a blood sample and stick it on a shelf, you have nothing recognisable in about a week. So why would there be anything left in dinosaurs? Such a response is understandable, considering that she thinks dinosaurs died out 65 million years ago. But surely such data suggests it wasn't that long ago.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
So did you get a sense of how surprising it was for those with a secular evolutionary view to find something like this? Like, look at some of these other quotes that Dr. Schweitzer said. She says, as the fossil dissolved, transparent vessels were left behind. It was totally shocking, she says. I didn't believe it until I tested it 17 times. Well, of course it's shocking in a secular worldview with dinosaurs dying out millions of years ago, right? She says, after we had the data, I didn't publish it for over a year. I was terrified. What was she terrified of? She had directly contradicted the theory of evolution based on the secular worldview. So she says, well, that leaves us with two alternatives for the interpretation. So here's her conclusion. Either dinosaurs aren't as old as we think, or we don't know exactly how these things get preserved. But the funny thing is, we do know how things get preserved because we can test that, right? In fact, she said herself, when you think about it, the laws of chemistry and biology and everything else that we know says that it should be gone. It should be degraded completely. It should be degraded completely. See what she's saying here is observable scientific laws like chemistry and biology tell us that soft tissue should be gone from specimens if they're millions of years old. So in fairness, that doesn't really leave us with two conclusions, does it? We now only have one alternative, which is she doesn't really know how old dinosaurs are. They're older than she thinks they are, right? Wow. Have any of you heard about this before? Some of you have? Yeah, pretty interesting, eh? Now, this was actually first discovered in 2008, and I've got a special little treat for you today. I actually have a clip from the original 60 Minutes episode that broke this story. So check this out.
What happened next happened by mistake. Mary put some fragments of the bone in acid to dissolve away the outermost layer of mineral. But the acid worked too fast, and all the mineral dissolved away. Being a fossil, there should have been nothing left. But there was. And it was elastic, like living tissue. This is ink. No. She showed us video she took under the microscope.
That's really what happened? Yes. That's the dinosaur bone without mineral now. That's what was left.
It looked like the soft tissue she would have expected to find if it had been modern bone. This was impossible. This bone was 68 million years old.
So you see this, and you think, what? You think you didn't want to tell anybody. They'd be ridiculed, right?
And so I said to my technician, okay, do it again, I don't believe it.
And yet, in sample after sample, they were there. Things that looked suspiciously like flexible, transparent blood vessels. She finally mustered the courage to tell Jack.
She said she dissolved the bone away and there were blood vessels. And, I was like, shocked.
How could that be?
How could that be? That's right.
The things Mary was finding inside dinosaur bones,
Look at that.
blood vessels, and even what seemed to be intact cells, pose a radical challenge to the existing rules of science, that organic material can't possibly survive even 1 million years, let alone 68 million.
Isn't that wild? Now, let me ask you, does this really pose a radical challenge to the rules of science? Or does it pose a radical challenge to the secular evolutionary worldview, right? And since then, we've found lots of examples of soft tissue in dinosaur bones, soft, stretchy tissue, blood cells, blood vessels, proteins, and even DNA. I mean, DNA is a very volatile molecule. If it could maybe last 20,000 years if it doesn't go above 10 degrees Celsius, and it gets a lot hotter than 10 degrees in Montana and places where you find these dinosaur bones. But we now have lots of different samples of soft tissue and dinosaur bones, including duck-billed dinosaurs, triceratops, and even T-Rex. We actually partner with other creation research organizations to maintain a list of biomaterial fossil papers. So there's now over 130 papers published so far by top science organizations like Nature and National Academy of Sciences, and 62 of them specifically are related to dinosaurs. Many of them in recent years, as well as one as recent as February 25th from Dr. Schweitzer. So there you go. Lots of soft tissue in dinosaur bones. And one of these reports, by the way, is about amino acids found in our Stegosaurus. So there you go. Scientists have found this biomaterial in Stegosaurus fossils. So then if we ask ourselves, could Stegosaurus have died out tens of thousands of years ago? Well, let me put it in the words of Dr. Schweitzer. She says, traditionally there was little hope that biomolecules might be recovered from bone more than a few thousand years old. All right, so that means no, dinosaurs could not have died out tens of thousands of years ago. Okay, so what about in the last few hundred years? Well, if dinosaurs died out in the last few hundred years, we should have lots of evidence of dinosaurs living recently with humans. And we do. Yeah, check out this one. This is a carving from Hongshan, China. It's a turquoise dragon here. Look at this actual reconstruction of a real dinosaur. This is a Centrosaurus dinosaur. Okay, now this is from 2000 in BC. They found this carving. That's shortly after Noah's flood, 4,300 years ago. So think about this. If dinosaurs died out millions of years ago, before humans ever evolved, and they were not rediscovered until paleontology, like in the 1800s, how did the carver know how to carve this dinosaur 4,000 years ago? Right? Clearly he had some experience with these dinosaurs. Here's another one he did. This one, look at how close this is to a reconstruction of a real dinosaur. It's called a Protoceratops. Like, do you think he made this up from his head? I don't think so. Now you can find these examples and a bunch of other examples of dinosaurs living at the same time with humans in our book called Dire Dragons. I'll tell you a bit more about that in the end, but that's where I got these pictures from. But yes, we have these Hongshan carvings from 2000 BC, but we also have accounts of encounters with dinosaurs or dragons from around the world throughout history, all the way up until the first fossil was actually recognized as a dinosaur. His name was Megalosaurus, and he was discovered in 1824. And that's what gave birth to the modern paleontology movement. But let me show you some other things along this timeline here. For example, you've probably seen this Chinese zodiac. That's the 12-animal cycle. It was standardized during the Han Dynasty, which ended in China in 220 AD. That's when it ended, okay? So this is right around zero-ish. So let's take a closer look at this. You've probably seen this guy before and has different animals, such as this one. What kind of animal is that? What is it? Snake, yeah, that's right. It's a snake. And by the way, is a snake a real creature or is it imaginary? It's real, right? We see them around today. It's real. Okay. Okay, what about this one? You can just shout them out. What's that? That's a horse. Real or imaginary? Real. Okay. All right. What about this one? Goat. Monkey. Yep. Yep. That's rooster, actually. You're the rooster. Yeah. Dog. Very good. Pig. By the way, pigs real or imaginary? Pigs are real. Farmers around. Okay, what about this one?
Mice, rats.
Yeah, rat. You're the rat, and this is what? Yeah, they call it the ox. You're the ox. Tiger. And this one? Rabbit. Right. You're the rabbit. Real or imaginary? Real. Okay, we just went through 11 real things that existed around zero, and then what do you think this one is? Right? It's a dinosaur, a dragon. Right? So here we have examples of these 12 real creatures that existed. And this thing was finished, the Han Dynasty ended in 220. This is just at the very early stages of our history. And there's more, like the church, this is a church father, his name's John of Damascus, and he lived around 700, okay? But he retells an account by a Roman historian who lived from 155 to 236, so this is getting quite old. And here's his little account. He says, Dio the Roman, also known as Cassius Dio, who wrote the history of the Roman Empire and Republic, reports the following. One day, when Regulus, a Roman consul, was fighting against Carthage, a dragon suddenly crept up and settled behind the wall of the Roman army. The Romans killed it by order of Regulus, skinned it, and sent the hide to the Roman Senate. The dragon's hide, as Dio says, was measured 120 feet long. Okay, so here's an historic account from a Roman historian being retold by one of the church fathers about slaying a dragon. There's another story by a Welsh scholar named Nennius, and he wrote a book in 796 called Historia Britonum, which is Latin for History of the Britons. And in his story, he retells this story of a boy speaking to the king, and this is what the boy said. He says, there are two serpents, one white and the other red. The two serpents are two dragons. The red serpent is your dragon, and the white serpent is the dragon of the people, who occupy several provinces and districts in Britain. Now, of course, this is a retelling of a boy's story. We don't know if the story is entirely true, but what it does show is that the Welsh were at least quite comfortable referring to dragons as real creatures as they tell these accounts. And I don't know if anybody knows what the flag of Wales looks like today. Do you know what's on it? Yeah, looks like that, doesn't it? So you can see the Welsh knew about dragons 1,000 years before paleontology, before we dug up any dinosaurs. Look at this one. This is a carving from 1186. And I don't know if you can see that there. It's pretty small. I'll show you a bigger picture. But can you see what kind of dinosaur that is? It's a Stegosaurus. That's right. So this is 1186. This is at the Buddhist temple in Cambodia. And it's carving in the doorway. And it has an inscription of 1186. Here's a little bigger shot of it. So think about this. This is a carving of a Stegosaurus from just over 800 years ago. So this is strong evidence that people had first-hand experience with a Stegosaurus only hundreds of years ago. And I'll give you one more bonus carving. It's not a Stegosaurus actually, but it's just so cool I have to show it to you. This one is at the Carlisle Cathedral in the UK. And inside that cathedral is the tomb of Bishop Bell, who died in 1496. And around his tomb, you can see all these carvings etched into the brass underneath the carpet. If you pick it up, you'll see all these kind of things you recognize, like a bat, a dog, a fish, a bird, real creatures that existed at the time. And you'll also see these sauropod dinosaurs. So these were real creatures that the graver knew about in 1496. And look how much these look like real dinosaurs. This is a Volcanodon reconstruction. Now the guy on the left, he's slightly different in that he's got some little spikes on his tail. But look at this. This is a Shunosaurus dinosaur. Look at his tail. You think this guy just made this up from his mind? He has experience with real creatures, right? Leading all the way up until, what do you know, it's 1800s. Oh, we discovered dinosaurs. So here we have lots of evidence that dinosaurs lived just a few hundred years ago. Well, that begs the question, maybe they haven't died out yet. Are they still alive today? So if you saw some of these photos and videos I've showed you so far were cool, wait until you see this. No, I'm just kidding. I don't have any recent photos of dinosaurs. We don't have any hard evidence that dinosaurs still are alive today. So our conclusion is they're probably extinct at this point, and we've written an article on our website that says that. It says dinosaurs are almost certainly extinct, so you can check out that for the details about it if you like. But even though they're probably extinct today, there's good scientific evidence that clearly show that dinosaurs were alive recently. All right, let's take a look at another dinosaur. Anybody know what this guy is? Yeah, the brontosaurus, like that's the type it is. These are sauropod dinosaurs, and there's many different types. This one in particular is a Brachiosaurus, it's called. So let me ask you this question. What killed Brachiosaurus? What killed all the dinosaurs? Well, I think the extinction cause was pretty well figured out in 1982 by Gary Larson. in his cartoon here. He says, the real reason dinosaurs became extinct, apparently due to smoking and other harmful habits, I guess. I guess you could refer to this as the junkie theory. Not quite as popular as the constipation theory, that they went extinct due to gas and whatnot. That's actually, this one here is actually a real theory, that basic changes in their diet caused gases and stuff, and they had trouble digesting food. Real theory, as is the asteroid impact theory. You've probably heard of that one. That's the most popular one, that an asteroid hit the Yucatan Peninsula in Mexico 66 million years ago and wiped out the dinosaurs, but remarkably had virtually no effect on many other creatures, including other reptiles, which survived quite happily. So that's a very strange line of reasoning. Take a look at this video.
One of the biggest mysteries in Earth history is what caused the extinction of dinosaurs. There are over 100 theories, including the suggestion that dinosaurs suffered from slit discs, shrinking brains, or chronic constipation. The most popular idea is that a meteorite hit the Earth and caused dramatic changes in Earth's climate, which led to the demise of the dinosaurs. However, even though the story is often repeated as fact, many scientists don't believe it. For instance, in their book, The Great Dinosaur Extinction Controversy, two evolutionary scientists explain how the meteorite idea has become a new dogma that has outstripped the evidence. They expose many problems with the theory. For instance, how did some organisms that require daily sunlight inexplicably manage to survive an event that supposedly blacked out the sun and caused 50% of species on Earth to go extinct? So it appears that even the best evolutionary theory of dinosaur extinction can't see the light of day.
To find out more from Creation Ministries International, visit our website, creation.com.
So this asteroid impact theory, that's still the leading theory, although it is starting to fall out of favor a little bit. See this Yahoo News article. It says, dinosaurs, this is basically a 2022 article about a study published by the Proceedings of the National Academy of Sciences. And it says, dinosaurs weren't wiped out by an asteroid 66 million years ago, study suggests. And basically their new theory is that it was due to volcanoes instead. And there's many more extinction theories aside from chronic constipation and the asteroid impact theory, but there's cosmic rays from a supernova and changes in the magnetic field of the Earth, and that their brains were too small and different things like this. But there's no one scientific consensus on why dinosaurs went extinct. You know, in his book, Dinosaurs of Utah, Professor Frank DeCourton says, even now at the end of the 20th century, there's no single explanation for the demise of the dinosaurs that is universally accepted by even a simple majority of scientists. But what are the other possibilities from a biblical perspective? Well, what about the idea of post-flood climate change? Like, imagine how the environment would have changed, and is that conducive for dinosaurs to live, or the food supplies, or things like that, right? That's an option if you're thinking of a biblical worldview. What about this one? Overhunting. You ever hear that one? But if humans were alive at the same time as dinosaurs, like, you know, these legends of, you know, St. George and the Dragon or Beowulf, and maybe they weren't as legendary as you think. It would have been quite the thing to conquer and kill a dragon, right? So, and there's also every other, you know, animal extinction reason that we get today. Animals go extinct every year. We don't need a sort of a special reason for dinosaurs necessarily. All right, let's talk about this guy. Who is he? Triceratops. You know your dinosaurs pretty good. Oh, they have 5 kids. All right, so what we're going to ask about this one is, when did the last Triceratops live? Because the last dinosaur supposedly died out 65 million years ago. But I'll give you some multiple choice on this one. So let's say 66 to 68 million years ago, or the Bible doesn't tell us when dinosaurs lived, or about 6,000 years ago, or at the time of Noah's flood. So there's some options. Let's go through them. About 66 to 68 million years ago. See, that, of course, is according to the theory of evolution. I always like to remind people, but evolution is not science. There's lots of confusion out there. Science is the observable, testable, repeatable stuff, right? So evolution is based on the secular worldview, which only accepts natural processes. But as Christians, we should be basing our understanding on a biblical worldview. So I'm going to talk about that. The Bible, does it even tell us when dinosaurs lived? Well, it doesn't mention dinosaurs or even dragons in the creation account, But it does tell us when they lived, because it says, and God made the beasts of the earth according to their kinds. God created man in his own image, and there was evening and there was morning in the sixth day. So were dinosaurs beasts of the earth? Yeah, so they were created on day 6, right? Alongside of man, the same day. So Triceratops could not have lived before dinosaurs were created on day 6. Okay, but when was day 6 of creation? We talked about this a little bit this morning. Some of you might say now it's 6,000 years ago. Okay, so where does that come from? Well, Jesus said, I gave you this example this morning, Jesus said that, but from the beginning of creation, God made them male and female. So the beginning of creation, there can't be millions or billions of years before that. So God made dinosaurs and man at the beginning of creation on day 6. But we also have an eyewitness biblical account all the way from day 6 when Adam was created all the way to Christ. Okay, so Matthew's book traces the lineage from Jesus through Joseph, his father, Solomon, David, Abraham, all the way through that way. And Luke traces the line back through Mary all the way, again, they converge at David, but then all the way to Adam. And there are other scriptures that give us the age of the patriarchs and the reigns of the kings, so we can get a timeline here of 4,004 years to the time of Christ. All right, so we know that Jesus was born about 26 years ago, so that gives us the beginning of creation about 6,030 years ago. Okay, so when did Triceratops live? Well, we'd be inclined to say about 6,000. When did he first live? About 6,000 years ago. But that may not be true, because God didn't create all the species that we have today 6,000 years ago, right? This is that scripture. God made the beasts according to their kinds, and livestock according to their kinds, and everything creeps on the ground according to its kind. So you see, through mutations and natural selections, God's original created kinds gave rise to all the species we have today. And again, it's important to acknowledge that changes within a kind, that's not molecules demand evolution, right? And so we believe there are about 60 different original dinosaur kinds, such as the Ceratopsian kind, from the Greek keratos and ops. It means horn-faced, keratos ops. Anyone want to guess what Triceratops means? 3-horned face. Nice. There he is. He's part of the Ceratopsian kind. Now, he may have been the first Ceratopsian dinosaur who lived 6,000 years ago, but he may have also risen from the original Ceratopsian kind, 1,000 years later as a result of mutations and natural selection. But again, that's not evolution. He's still a Ceratopsian, and definitely still a dinosaur. Okay, so Triceratops may have lived about 6,000 years ago, but he certainly wasn't around before that. Okay, what about at the end of Noah's flood? Well, did Triceratops live at the time of Noah's flood? Any guesses? Pardon? Yes. How do you know? That's right. Yes, because we have fossils of them. Yeah, so because we have fossils of them, and we know the flood caused most of the fossils, and we know that everything that was around at the time was on the ark, therefore they were on the ark. Okay, so let's talk about fossils a bit, because I think they have a strong component of the gospel message, believe it or not. So let me start with a secular worldview on fossils. So according to the secular worldview, the fossils formed slowly over 3.8 billion years, and the fossil record would be a sort of a record of how things evolved slowly over time, and they just kept getting better and better and better, and once the evolution had enough time to perfect humanity, this guy popped out. There you go. Who's buying it? No. Let me give you the biblical worldview. See, what the biblical worldview says, God created everything in 6 days. And at the end of his creation, he said it was very good. But Adam and Eve sinned, and that's when death came into God's very good creation. And as a result, all mankind was then born with a sin nature that we inherited from Adam and Eve. And that separated us from God. So then the earth became filled with violence, and God decided to send a global flood. And see, that's, let me just draw in here the ark first. Okay? So he sent a flood to destroy the earth and the animals, but Noah's ark was to save those who were on board. Now, what the fossil record shows us here is a record of the way things decayed in the flood, right? The order they decayed in the flood. And most people don't realize this, but about 95% of fossils are marine fossils, which makes sense because they're at the bottom, the sediment covers them, and then they're fossilized, right? Terrestrial plant fossils are only about 4% of the fossils, and only 1% is terrestrial land fossils, including dinosaurs. So it's a very small fraction, because those are the ones that are up higher, and they're going to drown, and they're going to decay, and they're going to get scavenged, but they're not getting covered in the sediment so much. All right, so what's the rest of the gospel message? As well, as we know, God sent his Son to earth, Jesus, and he lived a sinless life, and he died on the cross and paid the penalty for the sinfulness and the wickedness of this guy. And to all of us. And you know, Jesus came to set us free, and all we have to do is believe that he came for us. And so that's my encouragement to everyone today, is to make sure your heart is right with Jesus. And you've probably never thought about fossils in context of the gospel message, but you can see there's two different ways of looking at it. And one is a biblical worldview that means everything. Okay, so from the flood we get the fossils. We see Triceratops fossils in the ground. Therefore, Triceratops existed at the time of the flood. So that also means that there were ceratopsian dinosaurs like Triceratops on the ark, because God said, every living thing of all flesh you shall bring two of every sort or every kind into the ark to be alive with them. All right, so there's at least two of every kind of thing that had flesh. Everything was alive at the time when on the ark. Therefore, ceratopsian dinosaurs like Triceratops were on the ark. But ceratopsian dinosaurs are not the biggest dinosaurs. Like, we also have these big sauropods like Brachiosaurus, and they're much bigger than Triceratops. So it makes one wonder, were Brachiosauruses on the ark? You know, how did poor Noah get all these dinos on the ark? Well, first of all, the ark was probably a lot bigger than you realize. So it's said in the Bible, it's length of 30 cubits and a breadth of 50 cubits and a height of 30 cubits. So that's the measurement from a man's elbow to fingertips, which translates into about as tall as a 4-story building and about 1.5 football fields long. So this was a massive boat. And the second thing you might not realize is that, well, if you think about it, you probably would, is that all dinosaurs start out small, right? So for example, this is an adult Mesosaurus. Now their length gets up to 30 feet and they weigh up to 4 tons, but they don't start out that way, right? They all start out as eggs. This is a baby Mesosaurus, what it would look like coming out of its egg. It's a reconstruction from fossil remains found in Montana on Egg Mountain. Here's a reconstruction of an entire Mesosaurus nest. So dinosaur eggs were 4 to 12 inches long on average, about the size of a goose or an ostrich egg. So obviously, God wouldn't have brought the biggest dinosaurs on the ark. He would have brought the young reproductive ones onto the ark. In fact, we believe that the average size of the animals on the ark were about the size of a sheep. Which, of course, begs the question of how many sheep could you fit on Noah's ark? Well, for reference, you could fit about 240 sheep in an average standard railway stock car if you had cages on both sides all built up. But Noah's ark was big enough to hold 522 railway stock cars. So it could actually hold about 125,280 sheep on the ark. That's how big the ark was. Wow. That sure gives a different impression than the sort of bathtub shape ark you're used to seeing with the overcrowded ark with the animals falling out, right? If we want to draw this realistically, here's a way to do it. You can see there would be lots of room for all the different dinosaurs, including, there's a couple of sauropod teenagers there as well. So lots of room on the ark. All right, let's talk finally about, seems like everybody's favorite. What's this guy's name? Yes, Tyrannosaurus Rex, T-Rex. Okay, let's talk about what T-Rex was created to eat. Plants or animals? Pardon? He's got big teeth. Yeah, most people say it's animals because look at his teeth. But check out this guy. This is a black-eared flying fox. Look at the fangs on the front of him. Do you know what his diet was? Mostly fruit. What about bears? What about bears? You know, in the words of this conversation between these far side bears eyeballing some humans, come on, look at these fangs, look at these claws. You think we're supposed to eat just honey and berries? Well, despite their claws and teeth, bears mainly are vegetarian. Bears, dinosaurs, and actually all animals were originally plant eaters. Because it says in the Bible that sin came into this world through one man and death through sin. So there's no death before sin. So you can't have dinosaurs killing and eating other animals before Adam and Eve sinned. See, that's why God said in Genesis, and to the beasts of the earth, and to every bird in the heavens, and everything that creeps on the earth, everything that has breath in its life, I have given you every green plant for food. And it was so. So if we start with a biblical worldview, we know that dinosaurs originally ate plants. In fact, Behemoth actually ate grass. It says, behold, Behemoth, which I made as I made you, he eats grass like an ox. Now this was actually a big problem for evolutionists because they thought that grass evolved way after dinosaurs died out until they discovered stuff like fossil dung revealing dinosaurs did graze on grass. And this is an article from New Scientist, and it says, one of the most common mistakes in the prehistoric book is not wrong after all. Dinosaurs did eat grass. Depicting dinosaurs munching on grass was considered by experts to be as foolish as showing prehistoric humans hunting dinosaurs with spears. Actually, neither one is very foolish if you have a biblical worldview, right? Okay, so then T-Rex ate plants. Well, we also have evidence that T-Rex eventually started eating animals from discoveries like this king-size theropod coprolite. Coprolite is a scientific term for fossilized dung. But this article says, there's no ambiguity here about the theropod origin of this Cretaceous coprolite we report here. This specimen was produced by a Tyrannosaurus, most likely Tyrannosaurus rex. And by the way, this was originally reported in 1998. In the very next issue of Creation magazine, you could read about the details. It said a coprolite fossil dung specimen has been found, which is clearly from a meat eater. Around 40% of it consists of undigested bone fragments. So clearly, at some point, T-Rex began eating meat. And that is consistent, actually, with the biblical worldview, because after the flood, God said, everything moving that lives shall be food for you. As I gave you green plants, I give you everything. So I always like to say, relax, carnivores. You can eat meat. You can eat everything. You can eat hot dogs, which is kind of like everything. So, all right, lots of information we went through about dinosaurs, but let's just talk for a bit. Why is this important? Like, who cares about dinosaurs? Well, is it to better understand our role in society? Probably not. What about to help us be able to advance technology? I don't think so. Is it maybe because these dinosaurs, they're super fun and everybody loves them? Well, in a way, kind of, because they do capture the fascination of young and old. And they're important because they're used by the enemy to promote a secular worldview, to cast doubt on the biblical worldview, and to lead people to atheism. Tom Holland, popular author of the book Dominion, about the history of Christianity, he says, I vividly remember my shock when at Sunday school one day I opened a children's book and found an illustration on its first page of Adam and Eve with a brachiosaur. 6 years old I may have been, but of one thing, to my regret, I was rock solid certain. No human being had ever seen a sauropod. A faint shadow of doubt for the first time had been brought to darken my Christian faith. And Jeffrey Allen Myers, he's a blogger from the Meaning Without God project. He says, dinosaurs were my gateway drug to atheism. And while I was still 6 or 7 years away from reaching the conclusion that God either didn't care about us or didn't exist, the dinosaurs had shared an important secret that the Bible can be wrong. But there's another reason that dinosaurs are important, and that's because they can be used by Christians to answer questions about biblical history and to reach people with the gospel message. I was going to show you this testimonial here. It's actually from a person from Saskatchewan. And they sent this in to us, and it says, "You are making a huge difference. When I was a child in the 80s, I loved dinosaurs. Back then, my parents hadn't taught that they were not biblical, so I had to stop learning about them. Fast forward to my kids who have been raised on creation books and DVDs. Now we share this info with my parents and others. I'm sure there are many more families like ours, but don't stop or slow down. It's an uphill battle to the end." And so basically what we come out to these churches to do is to recruit you. It's to be able to help us to be able to defend the biblical world to the world around us, the biblical worldview, I should say. And we want to reach others with the gospel. And of course, that starts with us getting equipped ourselves, right? And continuing to learn. And that's what we are. We're an equipping ministry. We create the resources and bring them out to churches for you. I've already talked a bit about the resources. I'll just show you some dino stuff that I have downstairs. Like these are some inexpensive flashcards that have facts about 5 different dinosaurs. So we can start kids at a young age learning about them. We have a comic book pack that includes a comic called Dinosaurs or Dragons. There's a book here called Exploring Dinosaurs with Mr. Hibb, and it has hands-on experiments that kids can do. And then there's books for the whole family. Remember the Han Shan drawings? This was where it came from, this Dire Dragons. It's a beautiful coffee table book. It's by an Alberta author. And he shows evidence of dinosaurs living with people from all around the world. I also got Dracorex Hogwartsia from there as well, the fire-breathing dragon. And then our own book we have, I mentioned earlier, Titans is our most comprehensive book on it. And as well, we have DVDs and videos, and they're included in the kids packs as well. We've got some dinosaur books in there as well as our big library pack. So anyway, lots of different resources that you can avail yourself of if you're interested. And I think most of you are here for the first service, but again, if you're interested in the magazine and if you want to sign up, you can have a magazine and DVD to take home with you today. But just get on our list and help us get the word out. That's the important thing, is that we get people to continue to learn on a regular basis and to be encouraged in their faith and to know that science supports biblical history. Amen? Well, thank you so much. I know it was, again, a lot of information, but thank you for your attention, and I hope this has encouraged you a bit.